On today's show, what's going on in Carolina with these prospect signings? And it's Lane Hutson time. We'll talk about that and a lot more on today's episode of Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, Sebastian and I break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Hadi Kalakash with Sebastian High. We're both scouts at Dobber Prospects, and on today's episode, we're going to be breaking down, first and foremost, some Carolina Prospects news. We'll talk about the recent signings of Scott Morrow, Bradly Nadeau, Gleb Trikozov, and Jackson Blake in our first two segments. We'll also talk about what the plan is moving forward with Carolina, signing these big names, these big prospects here that they have in their pool. Probably has something to do with an AHL team getting announced soon. They don't have one in the books yet, but that should be coming soon. And then in our final segment, we've left the best for last. We're going to talk about Lane Hutson signing with the Montreal Canadiens and when his debut is projected. Before we get into any of that, though, today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. If you are watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about next. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. And leave us a rating review. It helps the channel out a lot. So let's get things started here with the Carolina Hurricanes prospect pool. I think we can start with Scott Morrow because he's the only one of the bunch that's made his NHL debut. And it looked great. Let's start with the profile of Scott Morrow. All that good stuff, size, handedness, all that stuff. How many points he put up in his final year in the NCAA, what the projection has been over those years. So talk me through it, Sebastian. What's the scoop on Scott Morrow?
Yeah, so Scott Morrow is a 6'2", 194-pound right shot defenseman, turned 21 years old in November, and as you mentioned, he just signed his ELC with the Carolina Hurricanes and made his debut just on Friday night. He played an excellent game, but didn't record any points just yet, but this season with UMass, he played 37 games and logged 6 goals and 24 assists for 30 points, which was his lowest point and goal total of his college career, with his two previous seasons being very, very similar production-wise, but just a little notch better. So his rookie season was excellent with 13 goals and 33 points, and as a sophomore, he had 9 goals and 31 points. So the production was quite steady for him, always right between 30 and 33 points a season, and was just a consistent dynamic force from the blue line for the University of Massachusetts, and is now making the jump to the professional ranks. So what makes Scott Morrow such an intriguing prospect, and what can Carolina Hurricanes be excited for here?
What made him so interesting the whole time for me was the offensive acumen, the ability to understand how to create offense in the offensive zone and off the rush. Like that was a major part of his offensive toolkit. And that's only grown from then. The other major thing about his game is, the way it developed over the last few years. He went from a guy who pushes a pace at every puck touch, who carries pucks across lines and drives defensive formations, puts them on their heels and all that stuff from the blue line, to a really well-rounded two-way player. I think he's really improved his defensive game. He's gotten a lot more comfortable defending the rush, defending his zone. Those small habits, those small tools that you usually develop with time, he has. So it's really interesting to see him progress the way he has, and it's been really interesting to see him kind of get his signing in and play his first NHL game, and he played really, really well. I don't think he got a point in that game, but he out-game scored everyone on the Carolina Hurricanes, which is ridiculous for a rookie playing his first NHL game. Having a better game score than Jakub Slavin is just absurd, isn't it?
It is. I mean, hey, like you really can't complain with that kind of a debut, especially like coming late in the season when hockey is getting pretty close to playoff style. So yeah, Scott Morrow is excellent. Like as you mentioned, the offensive acumen is something very special in his toolkit. He is so deceptive with the puck on his stick, constantly creating from the blue line. And like him and Lane Hutson were truly the two most dynamic blue liners in the NCAA among drafted players this season. I think Zeev Buium would be making a run at that too, in that category. But yeah, like two of the most like electrifying defensemen in the entire collegiate ranks have just made the jump to the NHL. And Scott Morrow is going to be very interesting to kind of track in how he progresses with Carolina. He'll be able to take over some power play minutes with that team moving forward. And yeah, I'm very excited to see what kind of role he has now in the coming weeks already.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be really interesting to see him kind of progress there with Carolina. I always, Scott Morrow was a guy I had in my first round and well within it. I think I had him in the early 20s in my rankings in his draft year in 2021. And he's only taken off from there and kind of improved his game and added tools to his game. So I think that in retrospect, this might look like one of the best picks of the 2021 NHL draft. But moving on to Bradly Nadeau, who was another player who I was really high on early, and you weren't sold until you started watching a bit more of him, and all of a sudden you're on the same page as me, and you actually outranked me on Bradly Nadeau. He ended up higher on your list than mine last year in 2023. So talk me through his game, what makes him so interesting, and why it took you a while to get on the Bradly Nadeau hype train.
Yeah, with Bradley Nadeau, like the raw skill was always tantalizing, and he's always been very intelligent on the puck, but it wasn't fully coming together. And against BCHL competition, it really had to be overwhelming in order to really convince me. And I spent a lot of the season being a bit more appreciative of Adar Suniev, his teammates' game, in the consistency and the physicality and the projectability of it. But as the season wore on, the tools just kept refining for Bradly Nadeau, one of the smartest players from that 2023 draft class, one of the most lethal shooters from that draft class, one of the better puck handlers from that draft class. The overall offensive toolkit was just tantalizing. And in the end, I had him ranked 19th overall. So when Carolina picked him at 30, I thought that was excellent value and a real nice swing on upside. And here we are, 10 months after being drafted. He has his NHL contract, and that came after a season of 37 games where he put up 19 goals and 46 points as a freshman at the University of Maine. And this is a 5'10", 172-pound center or winger. I think he can play both. He's intelligent enough to play down the middle, but his kind of speedy and undersized game could also lend itself to the wing. So he's very adaptable offensively, can play any of the 3 forward positions quite well. And yeah, he's highly intelligent, highly skilled, and the sky's the limit with this player, especially in an organization like the Carolina Hurricanes. I think that the future is very, very bright for Nadeau.
Yeah, for sure. And for me, what really stands out with him is he's got one of the best shots in the NCAA. And last year I really put emphasis on the fact that Nadeau's probably the best goal scorer outside of Connor Bedard in the 2023 class. But yeah, it was really interesting to see him kind of go about his season, kind of develop these tools even more, round out his game, add more kind of projectability to the overall toolkit. Like there was a lot of major steps in Bradly Nadeau's game that made him quite an interesting prospect moving forward. Him and Josh Nadeau, his brother, formed one of the best 1-2 punches in the NCAA as well. The University of Maine doesn't have the amount of supporting cast that other programs have, like Boston College, of course, Boston University. Even you could put Denver and UMass and Michigan in that kind of bunch of teams that really have great, well-rounded rosters. That's not really the case for the University of Maine, but Bradly Nadeau has been a real bright spot on that team, and playing with your brother, who you've played with before, I think can definitely help in that element. And yeah, I mean, the projection with Nadeau is really interesting. You could see him become a 25, 30, 35 goal scorer in the NHL within the next 4 or 5 years. I think is a realistic kind of projection of where his game ends up. Does he end up playing as the whole ride at the University of Maine? Maybe. But I say, could he have played the whole ride at the University of Maine? Probably. But I think, getting him out of that program, getting him into the AHL, especially, and we'll get into that in a second, especially if Carolina has a concrete plan for how their AHL team's built, the cast are going to have there, how much their development staff's going to be able to work with their prospects, I think is a great idea. So yeah, that wraps things up for our first segment. We'll talk about the second. We'll talk about Gleb Trikozov and Jackson Blake in our second segment. Two other signings of the Carolina Hurricanes in this, heading into this off season, who are going to be playing in the AHL at the very least next season. We'll get into that right after these messages from our sponsors over at eBay Motors.
Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers to roof racks to exhaust kits, LED headlights, and far more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what it is that you are looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, which is available to US customers only, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply.
Alrighty, so moving on to two other prospects that the Carolina Hurricanes signed, and we'll also talk about what's the plan moving forward and what that looks like for the Hurricanes. We'll start off with Gleb Trikozov, because this was a player I think we were both quite high on in this draft year. Maybe me more than you. I had him in the top 10 in his draft year in, 2022, I think? So
Yeah.
he's a really interesting prospect. I mean, the intelligence with him has always been super, super clear. He's a player who consistently creates advantages. And he's a player who has a very strong, very accurate shot as well. His release is really good. But what really made him stand out was that ability to draw players in, that ability to open up lanes, right? But talk me through the profile first and foremost with Trikozov. What kind of player are we talking about? Size, handedness, where he's been playing, just all that good stuff.
Yeah, so Gleb is a 6'1", 192-pound right shot left winger, and he's been developing in the Omsk system, and he's been playing in basically all three tiers to varying degrees. He's played a couple KHL games. He's logged 3 total KHL games with Avangard Omsk, but mainly has been playing in the VHL, but also still has been logging games in the MHL, which is the junior rank of Russian hockey. So he's been bouncing around a little bit between levels of competition and has obviously played his best hockey at the MHL level against the weakest competition, but has really been kind of settling in against VHL competition over the course of the past season. So he's been game a little bit. He's been adding better details, and the consistency in his game has certainly been one of the things that's been a little bit rocky since he's been drafted, but that's been stabilizing a little bit this season. So he is again, very intelligent, goal-scoring threat, very skilled, can really pop out with some electrifying skill moves. He only turns 20 in August. He was one of the younger players from that 2022 NHL draft class, and he's now signed and looking to make an impact in that Carolina Hurricanes organization.
Yeah, he's looking really interesting. And I just want to have a quick parenthesis on this situation here with Russian prospects. And Carolina has maximized the value on that. Is that there's a pretty significant market inefficiency in the NHL regarding how Russian prospects are viewed. And I can't name you the last time a Russian prospect who was drafted in the top 100 did not sign and come over within the next 4 or 5 years after their draft year. I can't remember the last time a Russian prospect picked in the top 100 flat out refused to sign a contract with an NHL team. Like, they want to come over. There's benefits for them to come over. Like, there's not much of an issue with them coming over. And, we've seen it very frequently recently. Obviously, Gleb Trikozov. We can also talk about Ivan Miroshnichenko in Washington. We could talk about Murat Khusnutdinov in Minnesota. Like, there are multiple examples of these Russian players signing and coming over. So I feel like the balance should balance itself out over the next couple of years, and as teams realize, maybe we kind of overblew this Russian factor issue, because every single year there's Russians dropping in the draft that shouldn't. So I'm really curious to see how Gleb Trikozov progresses, because so far with Miroshnichenko and with Khusnutdinov, since coming over, their progression has been really interesting and notable. So I'd expect the same out of Trikozov, even though the production so far in the MHL, in the VHL, hasn't really translated as well as those other guys. He hasn't been playing full-time KHL minutes or anything like that. I still think that, spending that much time playing against pro competition is good. I mean, in his draft year, he was playing in the VHL as well, which it's not the highest level of pro competition, but it is pro competition. He is facing adults. So I'm excited to see how that progresses with Trikozov. But moving on to Jackson Blake, the last player of the four major signings of the Carolina Hurricanes this offseason. Jackson Blake has 60 points in 40 games with the University of North Dakota. Like, he was their offensive juggernaut. He's ridiculous offensively, and he's a player you were a big fan of in his draft year, and that's only grown since then, right?
Yeah, Jackson Blake has been one of my favorites for quite a while at this point. He is a 5'11", 172-pound right shot right winger. He can also play down the middle, but his NHL projection is very much on the wing. And he was also yet another very young player for his draft class, much like Gleb Trikozov, as an August 3rd, 03 birthday. And yeah, as you mentioned, had an electric season in his final college season there with the University of North Dakota, and he finished off in style, logging 5 goals and 20 points in his final 10 collegiate games. So this is a player who is a really electrifying player with a puck on his stick, a really, really skilled playmaker, a high-end puck handler as well. The puck skills with him are real strengths. He's constantly pre-scanning on every single as he always has a mental map, especially with the puck on his stick of where his teammates and where the opposition is. And yeah, he is electrifying, and the ceiling is really intriguing with him. There's definite top 6 potential here, but he's not necessarily a slam dunk in that category. But I think that you could easily get a 20 goal, 60 point NHLer out of him in the next 2 or 3 years here.
Yeah, for sure. He's a bit too gung ho for my taste at times, but I can see the vision. But yeah, what's the plan for Carolina with all this? I mean, they haven't even announced their AHL team yet, but with signing these 4 big names, I'm guessing they're trying to build their core for that AHL team, of young stars who can develop, turn into NHLers in the near future, develop their game in interesting ways while they're playing the AHL. I think that all 4 of these guys can benefit from playing in the NHL, in the AHL next year. Sometimes the AHL, once you stay there for a long time, you can stagnate in your game, and that can lead to your NHL hopes kind of dwindling. But these are 4 guys that I could see definite paths forward for them in the AHL. In terms of how they develop their game. So there must be some plan in place for an AHL team to be announced soon, whether that's a return to the Chicago Wolves or some other option. The Carolina Hurricanes, I like the proactiveness with signing these young guys and getting them in the system as soon as possible and kind of figuring things out, kind of building their prospect core in the AHL and working out from there. Do you like that as well?
I do. I think it's going to be really interesting to see these skilled players start actually playing together, and the fact that these are all players that are now signed at between the ages of 19 and or actually 18 in Bradly Nadeau's case, and 21, right? So this is a future young core that hopefully in 2 years' time are going to be NHL regulars for the Carolina Hurricanes, and getting them to actually be able to play together and mature together with a hopeful new AHL team as well. I think that is a very intriguing plan from the Hurricanes brass.
For sure. And their drafting is just ridiculous. I mean, listen, if I
So
end up working
consistent.
if I end up working for an NHL team, I really hope it's the Carolina Hurricanes. They seem like a fun bunch to work with. But that wraps things up for our second segment. We'll talk about the best news left for last. Lane Hutson signing in Montreal and set to make his NHL debut soon. We'll get into that in just a second after these messages from our sponsors at Sleeper.
We are well past the halfway point of the NHL season with the playoffs just over the horizon, but there's still time for you to get in on the action with Sleeper. Sleeper is our #1 choice here at the Locked On NHL Podcast Network for all of your daily fantasy hockey needs. That's because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. All you need to do to win that is to correctly predict the outcome of 8 specific player stats. can get really creative with that if you want to. Whether you want to take the big swings on the stars of the league, whether it be Nathan McKinnon or Nikita Kucherov or, I don't know, Connor McDavid, the choice is yours. Or maybe you want to stay a little bit more in line with the theme of this specific show and take your swings on the NHL's young studs, whether it be Brock Faber or Connor Bedard. The choice is yours with Sleeper. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details.
Alrighty, so moving on to our final segment, we've left the best news for last. It's Lane Hutson time, baby. He signed with Montreal. Lane Hutson is going to be making his NHL debut over the 2-game stretch against the Detroit Red Wings. There's a home and home going on for Montreal, ending off the season on Monday and Tuesday. They play in Detroit on Monday and in Montreal on Tuesday. We already know that half of the BU team already bought tickets to the Montreal game. But we'll see about Detroit. He should join the team on Sunday in Detroit, in Michigan to start training. If he plays that next day in Detroit is still in question, but what's for sure is he's going to be there on Tuesday. And I bought some tickets thanks to our sponsors at Game Time. I was able to get some tickets to the Montreal-Detroit game in Montreal. I'm going to get a live look at Lane Hutson. Super exciting stuff. And great news for one of the most electrifying defensemen in recent memory, just overall, right? Like just the level of electrifying skill with Lane Hutson is what really stands out. And with that level of skill, does the size really matter that much?
No, I mean, there's still elements of his game that have some question marks to them, but I mean, Lane, there's no secret that we are massive Lane Hutson fans and have been since his draft year too. Like this is a 5'10", 161-pound left shot defenseman, so certainly undersized and doesn't have elite mobility, but that said, he is so deceptive, he's so skilled, and more than anything, incredibly intelligent on both sides of the puck. And that's what allows his entire game to tick. It's the intelligence, it is the anticipation, it is the ability to plan really complex plays in the offensive zone with the puck on his stick that makes him just so special. And he is electrifying, and we'll see how that jump to pro hockey is going to fare, because it is a very big jump in terms of quality of competition here from the NCAA ranks to the NHL. And I would not be shocked if we spent most of next season in Laval trying to really learn the professional game and refine the smaller details. But this is a very capable power play quarterback and a tremendously dynamic even strength producer as well.
For sure. Some interesting facts about Lane Hutson in his final year in the NCAA with Boston University. A total of 59 minutes and 2 seconds of possession time in the offensive zone, which is ridiculous. It leads all defensemen by a decent margin. And he leads all players, not defensemen, all players in slot passes with 145.
Yeah.
Slot pass complete. That's ridiculous. I mean, this is a player who understands the art of creating passing lanes in the offensive zone like nobody else. The way he blends deception, creativity, forehand, backhand moves, kind of lateral movement at the point. And, you know, we always talk about the skating not being high end. I would say it's not high end in defensive elements, but as soon as you get him in the offensive zone, as soon as you see him moving from that blue line, it's ridiculous the shiftiness and elusiveness that he has. Obviously, I think the output is better than the input in Lane Hutson's case regarding skating, right? Like he's a player who a lot of his skating skills come through his brain. It's the right move, it's the right cuts at the right time, but he just does it so well. I have a lot of trouble not seeing him have an impact very soon for the Montreal Canadiens on that blue line. Like I think even if with an off season of working on his game and kind of developing those elements and kind of adding some weight, improving his edge work even more, working with Adam Nicholas very closely regarding the usage of his tools. Within one offseason, I think we can see some major progress. I mean, he had Logan Mailloux on a leash in last preseason in those one-on-one drills. And Logan Mailloux is no joke. This guy's 6'3", 220 pounds, and with a long
Excellent
reach
skater.
and a lot of physicality, and an excellent skater. So like the ability to just toy with opponents bigger and stronger and better skating than him is just for me, that's a great sign that we're looking at a future NHLer here. But do you still see the upside with Lane Hutson as being kind of top pair in the NHL, or do you see that a bit more muted over the past few years? Like, what's your read on this?
Yeah, I still see that like the top pairing upside. Like, do I think it is a slam dunk that he will be a top pairing defenseman in the long term? Perhaps not, but
Yeah.
I think that the upside is certainly there. At the very least, first pairing like power play quarterback, and on top of that, at even strength, probably maybe a number 2 defenseman, and then being insulated by perhaps a right D that can log bigger minutes, whether that be, I mean, like David Reinbacher, hopefully for the Montreal Canadiens after spending a 5th overall pick on him. But we'll see how that progression keeps going. But either way, I think Lane Hutson can be the primary offensive driver from the blue line in a contending NHL lineup, as well as being like the real creator from the blue line on the power play. So I think he'll mesh really nicely with that Habs power play that is just being completely infused with young talent and dynamism, whether it be Cole Caulfield or Yuri Slafkovsky, or even Nick Suzuki isn't even 25 yet, right? So it's a very young top power play that's going to be able to mature together and learn together. And Lane Hutson is certainly going to be right in the mix in that.
Yeah, I think those two should be glued at the hip. The way that they benefit each other's games is pretty much ideal. And whether that was made, that whether that pick of David Reinbacher at 5th overall was made with that in mind or not, I think either way it works out really great for the both of them. I mean, Reinbacher's a player who needs someone who will entice him and push him to join the offensive zone, kind of push below the dots, kind of explore the offensive game off the puck. But he also needs that push to be able to carry pucks into dangerous areas. So if you've got a player like Lane Hutson who's so good at cueing players into the right spots with his body language, with his dekes, with his moves, a player who's so good at drawing pressure in and opening up more space for a player like that, I think if those two are a match made in heaven in terms of their play styles and the things that they do well. So for me, just glue them at the hip, whether that's at the AHL level and you graduate them together or one at a time. I don't care. Just the more time they spend together, the better. That wraps things up for today's show. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about next and what you thought of the episode. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to leave us a rate and review. It helps the channel out a lot. And make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today. They've got all your news and updates about what's going on around sports. And make sure to tune in for our next shows as we continue our prospect coverage for the month of April. This has been Hadi Kalikesh with Sebastian High, directors at Dauber Prospects, and we hope you tune in next time.